Our next presenter is Emily Noordyke, New South Wales DPI Technical Officer for Plan B, and she'll be stepping us through best practice for Varroa mite monitoring.
Hi, my name is Emily Noordyke. I work for New South Wales Department of Primary Industries in the role of Technical Officer Plan B, and today I'm going to talk to you about monitoring for Varroa. So you may already know about monitoring for Varroa, but we're going to go through some of the tips, tricks, and pitfalls today, so hopefully everyone can take something away from this talk. So you might ask yourself, why should I monitor? Well, monitoring is the basis for an effective Varroa control strategy. If you don't monitor, you won't know when the mites are at damaging levels in your hives. So it's really important to monitor consistently and effectively. And not to mention, it's also legally required every 16 weeks in New South Wales. But I want to start by giving you a note on visual inspection. So visual inspection, unfortunately, is not an effective method for Varroa monitoring, and this is because Varroa like to hide underneath the bees' bellies. As you can see from this picture just above me, there are two mites that have lodged themselves underneath the plates of the bees' abdomens, under abdomen. And so they really snug in there, they hide. So when you're going through your hive and doing your regular inspection, it's really hard to detect mites just on adult bees. So unfortunately, this makes visual inspection not effective. And if you do start seeing Varroa on top of your adult bees, then that means the damage has probably already been done. If you start seeing them on their backs, on their thorax, kind of on top of their abdomens, that usually means that the Varroa levels in your hives are already way too high and past damaging levels. So it's really, really important to use these other monitoring techniques that we're going to talk about today. So there are 5 main different monitoring methods that you can use. There's the alcohol wash, the soapy water wash, sugar shake, drone and capping method, and the sticky board method. And each of these methods have advantages and disadvantages, and also different specific situations where they're more effective or less effective. So we'll kind of talk about those today. But I do want to mention that I'm going to focus the presentation on the ins and outs of alcohol washing. Really, once you understand all of the steps in alcohol washing, then the soapy water wash and the sugar shake methods become much easier to go and learn on your own. So hopefully once we talk through the alcohol wash, you'll feel confident enough to tackle those other ones on your own as well. But I do want to note, we're gonna kind of gloss over drone and capping and sticky board method today, just because those are used in slightly different situations. So they are good for surveillance or kind of just getting an idea of presence or absence of mites in your colony, but they aren't as effective for determining the exact percentage of infestation or your mite load in the hive. And that's what you need to use to decide whether to control for mites or leave your hives be for now. So really we want to zero in on the alcohol wash, the soapy water wash, and the sugar shake today. So let's get into the grit of alcohol washing. So it's the most accurate method for determining infestation levels where Varroa is already established. So in places like the US, where I'm from, Varroa's been there for 35 years. And so a lot of us use alcohol washing to get an idea of the infestation rates in our hives and make an action. And then the alcohol works to dislodge mites from adult bees. So that's how you're able to get the mites off the bees and count them in your wash, at the end of your wash. So what will you need for an alcohol wash? Well, first and foremost, you will need some type of wash jar. And this wash jar pictured here is something that you can pick up from pretty much any beekeeping supply store. So it's a really great tool for monitoring, and it makes it really easy and straightforward. You can also use different types of wash jars. You can use a simple mason jar and a sieve, but we're not going to talk about that as much today. We're going to talk about this particular wash jar just for simplicity's sake. You're also going to need a container for shaking bees into. So you can get a bit creative here. This is your choice. Anything that will contain the bees that you're shaking off the frame. So a baking pan, such as above, could work. A bucket. You could use a piece of cardboard even. Potentially, if you've forgotten something to use, then you can also use a hive lid, get resourceful, basically anything that's going to allow you to shake the bees off and scoop them. You'll also need a 1/2 cup measure so that you can scoop the bees. And you can use methylated spirits, isopropyl alcohol, or ethanol for an alcohol wash. One other thing that you might find helpful is having a magnifying glass, using your phone to take a picture and zoom in on the results of your wash, or maybe your glasses so that you can see nice and close on the results of your wash. Those Varroa are really small, so this is something that you might find helpful. And in future slides, I'll show you kind of an idea of scale for Varroa in the bottom of a wash, so keep that in mind as we go forward. And finally, you'll want a bag or bucket for bee disposal. So let's dive into the steps of an alcohol wash. First, you'll place about 150 milliliters of methylated spirits or alcohol into your wash jar. Got a wash jar, for example, right here. So it goes up to just up there, but approximately 150 milliliters is what we're looking for. Then you'll open your hive and start going through the brood nest, and you want to find a particular kind of frame. So the ideal frame for a mite wash or any kind of mite monitoring, including the shake method, is to use an uncapped and capped mixture of brood on a frame. So above me is a good example. Obviously, we've shaken the bees off of this frame as the example, but you'll want that also pretty well covered with bees. And of course, remember to look for the queen. You don't want to shake her off the frame and scoop her up. So if you do find the queen on that frame, make sure to move her somewhere else or choose another frame. Next, you'll grab what you decided to shake your bees into or onto. In the picture right next to me here, we've taken a metal sheet and folded it in half. And so it acts as a type of chute almost. I've done the exact same thing with a piece of cardboard in the field when I've forgotten my other container to shake bees into. So this is a really easy way to shake bees. So yep, take that frame and you're gonna shake the bees forcefully right into your container. And once you've done that, you'll quickly scoop a 1/2 cup measure of bees. And the 1/2 cup measure is important because this is approximately 300 bees that fit into a 1/2 scoop. And then you'll take that 1/2 scoop of bees and put them into the jar containing the metho or the alcohol and screw on the lid. Now, these steps go kind of quickly. Once you shake the bees, you want to be ready with the scoop. Scoop those bees right out of your container and then dump them into your wash jar. And one thing I'd like to note is that with this jar, you've got a white insert it already acts like a sieve, and your bees for the alcohol wash are going to go right into this sieve. And your metho or alcohol will be in the separate part of the container in the bottom. So now that you have your sample of bees, it's time to do the actual shaking. So here you want to shake the bees vigorously for 15 seconds. And I like to shake the container in different directions just to make sure that the bees are well covered as you are doing the shake. Okay, so you've done that first step for 15 seconds, and then you can separate the bees from the container, from the liquid in your container, and inspect for the presence of mites. So you can either do that by taking off the lid and removing the bees with the white insert, or you can look underneath the jar and count the number of mites in the bottom. So that is a really easy way to do it. But if you do have a lot of mites in the bottom, it is also a good idea to separate those mites out between shakes, because we're going to be shaking a few times. So you might also want to have maybe some piece of cloth to help strain those mites through in between washes. Now that's most important if you really have a high mite load. But then you're going to repeat step 7, shake again for 15 seconds. Check for the presence of mites, and repeat again. So you're shaking for a total of 45 seconds here. And if the mites are present, at the end of your wash, count the total number of mites and put that into your apiary records. Now, here are the pictures that will hopefully give you an idea of the scale of the mites. So this picture closest to me here shows the little red-brown specks of mites in the bottom of this special wash jar. And those mites are pretty small. They're about the size of sesame seeds, to give you an idea. So pretty tiny. And then the picture further over here shows the little flecks of mites in the bottom of a bucket. So hopefully that gives you an idea of scale as well. Another thing to consider is that the mites might be harder to see if the alcohol or the metho has gotten really dirty. So again, you might have to strain the mixture, or it might be best to switch out your alcohol between washes so that water doesn't stay really dirty and it makes it harder to see the mites. And there are also some things that look like mites, but they aren't actually mites. So really for me, the biggest mite trick, I guess, thing that looks like a mite that isn't, is usually a little red-brown flake of wax that makes it into the sample. So really when you're looking for a Varroa mite, they're going to be very smooth, very ovoid, round, and not going to have like a jagged, irregular edge like a little flake of wax might. So you're looking for that perfectly ovoid little red-brown fleck. So then you'll want to repeat the required number of hive washes as per the requirements for your apiary, depending on the number of colonies that you have. And then at the end, dispose of dead bees by double bagging them and throwing them away. So now that we've talked about the alcohol wash, all the ins and outs, I want to give you a few notes on the soapy water wash. There are a few differences from the alcohol wash steps, but it's really mainly the same. We won't talk about those differences in detail today. That's something you can do on your own, just for the sake of time. But just keep in mind that there are a few differences. The main one being that you're using soap or a detergent. But definitely keep in mind that for a soapy water wash, you want to use a low suds detergent. If you have a really sudsy detergent, as you're doing that shake, it's going to get really bubbly and it'll be way harder to see the mites in the bottom of your wash. So here are a few notes on the sugar shake as well. There are really more differences in the steps from the alcohol wash in terms of timing, so the amount of time that you shake. There's a waiting period as well. So definitely something to dig into on your own if you're interested in doing sugar shakes. One thing to note, I think a major thing to note, is that it is not as accurate as an alcohol wash because that icing sugar is a little less effective at dislodging mites from the bees. So that's a big thing to keep in mind, but it is still an effective method to determine your mite loads. So still very much something that you can keep in your mite monitoring arsenal. One thing I also do want to note is that icing sugar can clump in high humidity. And if the icing sugar is really clumped, it's not going to be as effective at dislodging mites from the bees. And one advantage is that bees can be returned to the hive after you're done. So it's a non-lethal sampling method, which is really nice. So unfortunately, it's not as accurate, and an alcohol wash is really a great way to go. But here with the sugar shake, you can return the bees to the hive at the end. So we've gone over those main monitoring methods. Let's dive into determining mite loads. So really the whole goal of mite monitoring is to determine the number of mites per 100 adult bees. This is expressed as a percentage of infestation. And all of these methods that we've talked about, these three main methods I should say, the alcohol or soapy water wash and the sugar shake, all work to determine mite load in the steps that I'm going to talk you through in the next few slides. So once you've done your wash, count the number of mites in the sample, take that number and divide by the total number of bees in the sample, which should be about 300 if you've taken that hearty half scoop of bees, and then multiply that by 100 to get your percentage. But let's talk through an example of this. So let's say you find 6 mites after doing a wash on 300 bees. So take 6 mites, divide that by 300 bees, that gives you 0.02. Multiply 0.02 by 100, and then you get a 2% infestation rate, or your mite load. This can also be expressed as 2 mites per 100 adult bees. So I know it can be kind of a pain to have to mess with calculations when you're out in the apiary. So you can also use a good chart, a nice conversion chart like so. So you can look at the number of mites that you've gotten per 300 bees in your wash. So let's say 3% in this chart. And then right next to it is the percent infestation, your 1% infestation that correlates, or not correlates, but goes along with your 3 mites that you got in your wash, and on up, or in between as well. So we have, for simplicity's sake, used round numbers in this chart, but you might get 4 mites in your wash of 300 bees, and that would be a 1-point-something% infestation. So it's not always going to be clear cut, but that's why something like this chart can be really handy if you have it, you know, in your glove box, in your ute, or something like that. So let's just wrap up with some key takeaways. Monitoring is really fundamental in learning how to keep your bees healthy in the time of Varroa. I cannot stress this enough. The beekeepers who consistently monitor throughout the year and take action based on their mite levels are definitely the beekeepers that fare the best when Varroa is a part of their lives. And also, the alcohol wash, soapy water wash, and sugar shake are all effective monitoring methods. And at the end of doing your washing, make sure to determine those mite loads so you can take proper action if necessary. So thank you so much for listening today, and enjoy the rest of field day.